We are talking Blade of the 47 Ronin. Yes, that 47 Ronin. This is actually a sequel set 300 years after that original film that starred Keanu Reeves, that I'm sure most people actually don't remember. I only ever saw that movie once, and it was when it first came out, so I had kind of little to no memory of this movie before seeing the new one. And the new one is directed by Ron Ewan and stars Anna Akana, Mark Dacascos and Dustin Nugent, among others, of course. Now, this is kind of a strange movie because it's really nothing like the original movie, or at least from what I remember. Obviously set in contemporary times, although it does have a kind of Blade Runner-esque kind of sci-fi feel to it, although it is apparently in, contemporary Hungary, believe it or not. Yes, it's set in Hungary, and we'll explain that because it's an East meets West kind of situation. Also, it's cheap to film in Hungary. And this kind of essentially focuses on a young girl who may be the missing link to this kind of like line of 47 Ronin, all of whom descendants have been killed by kind of an evil witch guy. And she's kind of the last hope to essentially slay this witch before he reunites these two kind of magical swords and gets ultimate power. So there are kind of these remaining samurai families, one led by Mark Dacascos' character, have to try and find this girl, although she's kind of like knows nothing about it, and recruit her, train her in these mystical arts to hopefully defeat the bad guys. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let us discuss. What do we think of Blade of the 47 Ronin? No, okay, good stuff first. This is a slickly produced movie. I'm not quite sure what the budget was for this one, but it feels like it has a very stylized kind of style of direction here, really. A very kind of slickly produced movie with lots of kind of like slow downs and kind of quick edits and artistic shots, things like that. Very kind of stylized in some aspects, I think taking kind of leaf from movies like John Wick and things like that. And they actually even reference John Wick, even though Mark Dacascos is in this movie. So yeah, it's kind of, it definitely feels like a stylized movie. There's also loads of action in this film. If you like kind of martial arts movies, there's loads and loads of action, mainly kind of with swords and things like this, with our kind of group of samurais fighting against these kind of ninja warriors and things like that. Every kind of few minutes, it's punctuated by a kind of an action sequence of one description or another. I think some of the kind of the veteran actors do a great job. Mark Dacascos in particular, I think, has a very commanding presence in this movie. He's playing like this kind of samurai master, and even though he isn't, Japanese or anything, he still has this kind of very commanding presence, I feel, and is very good in the role. But some of the kind of the other more veteran actors, I think, also have a kind of a similar quality in this one. I think are quite good in it. Some of the stunt work here is excellent. I mean, it's kind of plussed to make it a little cartoony. But it's very kind of like over stylized in a way, and kind of, if you like kind of modern over the top kind of action films, it has that kind of aesthetic to it, with fast paced, computer generated wire work, kind of karate, kung fu moves, all that kind of stuff. So it's lots of kind of like high impact moves and loads of kind of stunt work and things like that. So it does feel like this movie, they've tried to put a lot in it, certainly physically, the kind of the performances, the kind of the kinetic kind of camera work and things like that. So it has a very kind of what I would describe as an MTV flavour to it. Quite kind of like contemporary, lots of kind of like high fashion. Now this may not be a good thing depending on your point of view, but this to me feels like a film which is a kind of a Westerners fetishized version of how they perceive Asian culture. That's the best way I would kind of describe it. Because you've got kind of loads of kind of martial arts. Everyone's doing kind of like, over the top martial arts moves. All the kind of the girls have got kind of like little mini skirts on, thigh high kind of leather boots and things like this. And they're all kind of like super kind of gothed up with their kind of makeup and all this kind of thing. So it's very kind of fetishized into a certain degree, kind of like to what I feel like, you know, certain kind of like anime fans and things like that kind of perceive and how they kind of fantasize about Asian kind of culture to a certain degree. I've been to anime conventions, I know what goes on, but there you go. So there's a good or a bad thing, depending on kind of how you look at it, I have to say. But it's got, you know, a young and attractive cast, all who are doing the kind of like, you know, sassy kind of characters and all that sort of stuff. So I feel this aims at quite a young audience, despite some of the stuff I'm going to say in a minute. But it does have a that kind of like a I think it thinks is a young, hip kind of vibe to it, or at least I think it thinks it does. This movie has a young, hip vibe. What I think like a 50-year-old man thinks is a young, what the kids think is a young, hip vibe. That's the best way I would describe it. The fashion choices here are a little bit kind of over the top, I would say. You know, I was watching this thinking, why is everyone dressed really weirdly? It's kind of like very over the top. That we go to a cosplay nightclub for some reason with no explanation. It just is there. But even outside of that, everyone's kind of wearing kind of, you know, people are just walking around with their swords and things like this. You know, I guess you could get it's a kind of somewhat of a fantasy movie to a certain degree, I suppose, like the first one. But yeah, it feels kind of like a somewhat of a anime fan's fever dream. What doesn't work? I kind of hate to say this, if I'm honest, because I feel like the cast, the younger cast, are kind of really invested in this film, but some of the acting here is quite awful. I mean, it's not so much the veteran actors, I've got to say, but some of the kind of the younger cast, oh my god, some of the line delivery here is terrible. Now, it's despite this being a largely Asian cast, it is actually spoken in English, but yeah, some of the line delivery is terrible, absolutely terrible, to the point where it's cringeworthy. Not everyone and not every scene, but there are some sequences where it is particularly bad. The second thing I would say that really kind of I think might put some people off is the over-reliance on CGI blood. Now, this kind of feels like it's aimed for younger audiences. But there's a lot of swearing and there's a lot of blood, albeit CGI blood. But there's a lot of it. But some of these CGI blood kind of dropping effects look terrible. I won't say what sequence it is because it involves a character's death, but there's one sequence where someone gets their throat cut. Oh my god, it literally looks like a cartoon. It looks like a cartoon. But that's not the only instance. Some of the these blood effects here is so they're so kind of badly kind of like CGI, you know, versions of kind of blood splatter and things like that. They would have been better off just not having it, just not having the blood. And to be honest with you, I didn't feel like the swearing was needed either. Now, I'm not a prude, I don't care about that sort of stuff, but it seemed forced in. It seemed like they didn't need it, but they just wanted to be that edgy. In fact, our main character seems to just drop kind of like swear words, almost forcing them into the conversation where it feels kind of unnatural. As to the dialogue, I have to be honest with you, again, this kind of feels like it was written by a 13-year-old and how they would perceive what they think is cool. Or it's kind of perceived by a 50-year-old trying to imagine what kind of like 18 and 20-year-olds would be like. One of those two. Maybe they're the same thing. Maybe it just kind of like goes from 13 to 50, I don't know. But it kind of doesn't really feel quite convincing as kind of like dialogue that would be spoken by the kind of the characters that is kind of portrayed here. Again, and I'll say with the exception of some of the kind of the veteran actors who I feel are able to kind of sell it. The movie falls into some serious cliches, right from our main kind of like female lead, this kind of girl who is this kind of maybe the kind of the chosen one. You know, she's a typical bad girl living on the street, stealing for a living, but she's got a heart gold and all of this. And we know she's kind of hip because she's got coloured hair and she wears like a beanie hat and things like that. We've got the kind of the obligatory training montage where she's learning martial arts in a matter of days and things like this. It's very silly, you know. Not that the original was a particularly serious kind of you know, martial arts drama film. It was a fantasy movie, but I feel this kind of ratcheted it up, even though it doesn't have kind of like the kind of the monsters and things that movie kind of did, as I remember. It just feels almost a little bit more sillier, if that makes sense. The bad guys as well, God, it's kind of embarrassing. I mean, the bad guys are like, literally look like the Power Rangers vision. There's just like wave and wave of faceless goons, all in kind of these like, you know, hoodies with masks on. They're meant to be ninjas and things, but kind of look like those bad guys from the Power Rangers, like the disposable kind of stormtroopery ones. And I'll be honest with you, I'm watching these kind of fights, and you know, the kind of stunt work is impressive, but you never really feel like there's any stakes. You know, it's always kind of faceless bad guys. And we got a couple of like lieutenants and stuff like that, but they just seem like, you know, morons, to be honest with you. And our main bad guy is so hammy. It's so hammy, which is weird. If it had this been a movie made for kind of a younger audience, I would get it. But it isn't, because it's got all these shoehorned in swearing sequences and the kind of the over-reliance on CGI blood, which neither of which I think needed to be in there. So it's kind of like a real mix of tones. Like it's like a kind of a bloody version or an adult version of Power Rangers. It really is. And I know Power Rangers got like a big fan base. I don't be expecting that, but I'm just using that as a comparison. So it's a real kind of like odd tone to this movie. It's a fun movie, I will say that. It certainly is a fast-moving film. Lots of stuff going on. Visually, it's kind of interesting. I'm not sure why people completely, well, as I say, were buying this well, to be honest with you. It seems a little bit too kind of like fantasized, but nonetheless, it's still kind of fun to look at. There's lots going on. It's very colourful. You know, it's well shot, things like this. Lots of kind of great stunt work, but I'm never really buying any drama in this. Thanks large part of the script, thanks to the poor acting choices, to be honest with you, and the lackluster story, which is so obvious and kind of like just a basic kind of like, oh look, it's the chosen one kind of style, kind of storyline, really. So, you know, what is this movie like? I gotta be honest with you, it ends up being somewhat of an average movie. I think there's probably an audience for it that would kind of enjoy it, but a very undemanding audience, because I just don't feel there's much kind of like sophistication here. There's virtually none. There's virtually no sophistication, but there are elements here that I think are interesting. The lore is interesting, but I feel some of it is sidestepped. I think Dacascos is good in it. I think he really is. I mean, he's not like the main character, but he gets a reasonable amount of screen time. And you know, it's just a mixed bag, if I'm honest. So it's going to be a 5 out of 10, but I do feel there will be people who will really enjoy it, and there's going to be others that just think this is like neon crap. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? What did you think of it? Leave me a comment, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.